Hey guys, welcome back to another video. I'm Sarah from Who I Am Among the Pages, and if you're new here, thanks so much for showing up, and I hope you decide to stick around by clicking that subscribe button down below. And if you're returning, then thank you so much for coming back. I've missed you so much. So I'm actually really excited to do this video. It was just one that I thought of on a whim today. I did something I haven't done in quite a long time. Fortunately, I do have quite a bit of free time now, and I'm so lucky to have a beautiful backyard at my parents' house. And I ducked my sand chair from the beach out of the garage, and got my bathing suit and went out in the backyard and essentially pretended that I was at the beach. Sunscreen, bathing suit, whole 9 yards. Hosed myself off with the garden hose when I got too hot, and just sat out and read. It was such a nice day, and I am just about to finish a book that I've been working on for longer than I would have cared to. The Cruel Prince by Holly Black, so I'll be talking about that soon. But I used to do this kind of thing all the time when I was a kid, and it made me think of books I read as a kid and some memories of laying out in the backyard with some of my dolls or that sort of thing, and reading to them or just reading by myself once I was a little bit older. And I wanted to talk about the books that I loved as a kid, or that made me get into reading and made me love books. So this probably isn't going to be a video to watch if you want recommendations for yourself. I mean, most of these books, to this day, I would go back and read, especially one of them, which I'll talk about. I mean, they're still, even as an adult, they're entertaining. But maybe you can reminisce. Maybe you like some of the same things, or maybe you have kids and these are some very child-friendly, some of the very educational books that I would really recommend for any kid. They're very, very healthy reads. So just a few updates. I just released my first chapter of What Happens After, my Harry Potter fanfic. I am still working on my traditionally published novel, which I'm also considering self-publishing. I've just started looking into that option. And number 9 is still being rewritten, so I want to go ahead and get through that. Thank you all for reading and keeping up. But I want to get into these books because I want to talk. I love these books. So I'm sorry if this isn't your thing, but I'm so excited. So as per usual, because I talk so much, I picked out just 5 examples of the books I loved. There was many more that I'll never be able to remember the titles or the authors of. And unfortunately, I'll probably never see again. And there's one in particular that breaks my heart. But moving on. So the first one I want to talk about, I think, is a given. Any kid has read this. Harry Potter. And I mean, this one in particular is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. It is the first book in the series. But the whole Harry Potter series in general just absolutely changed my life when I read them. I started reading them, I think, in the 2nd grade. It was earlier elementary school because books and reading were my thing even back then, and I read at a higher reading level than most other kids. So even though they were rated 5th grade, I think it was like 4th and 5th grade on our like reading level thing, I was able to read them and understand them perfectly fine. So I did read them younger than most kids, or a fair number of kids, I feel like, and I just fell in love. I just was completely swept off my feet with Harry's story, and I connected so much with really all 3 members of the famous trio, just in different ways. I really felt for Harry and Ron, but I saw a lot of myself in Hermione because I was a kind of suck-up teacher's pet, especially in elementary school. Before I learned, like, you can make friends with other children, like, they're not going to bite you most of the time. And I was just swept off my feet with the world and the way that she wrote. I mean, it still does that to me. Reading these books feels like coming home. But especially at the time, it was like truly going somewhere without ever leaving my little desk at school. And I had never encountered writing quite that powerful and that would draw you in the way J.K. Rowling's did, especially at the time. Because you gotta remember, I don't know how old kids are, like 7, 8, 9. I think you're 9 in the 4th grade, so like 7 or 8 probably. you know, and at the time I was younger than Harry is, even in the first book. So I really looked up to him, and I couldn't wait. I was hoping against all odds that Hogwarts was real somehow. I remember on my 11th birthday, it was like, I think it was like a Wednesday night. Um, After everybody went to sleep, I still went down and sat by the front door. We have a staircase that leads right down to the front door. You have a small foyer and then the front of the house. And I went and sat on the last step, like with my head on the banister, just waiting. Like, I mean, I knew it wasn't gonna. I knew I wasn't gonna get a Hogwarts letter. I was like, there's no way this is real. I'm not even in the UK, but against all hope, I still waited. That's how powerful these books were to me. And I read them again in high school. I was probably a sophomore. And at the time, I was going through it. High school was very difficult for me. Just beyond all words and any explanation that anybody wants to hear. I hated it. And these books helped get me through probably one of the worst years of it. And I think a lot of people can say the same, and that is just really why these books changed my life. Every time I reread them, they change it a little bit more, and it's just a phenomenon that I rarely experience in literature. Even though I'm reading for school these incredibly powerful books, nothing does for me quite what these books did. And I love J.K. Rowling for it, and I love her characters and her world, and I owe her so much. So I could talk all day about the Harry Potter books, and I might do a video about the Harry Potter books if anybody would be interested. But moving on, changing gears pretty completely. Another series that has, I don't even know how many, but the Nancy Drew series. Nobody ever talks about these. I have never seen a booktuber even mention them, and girl, am I the only one that ever read these? I mean, they're super short. Oh, there's something stuck in mine. I mean, there's a whole series of them, but I just remember The Hidden Staircase being my particular favorite. There's a note in this. Hold on, guys. It's a little pink sticky note. Oh my gosh. No, it's gonna rip. Save for first day of school. Whoops. Anyway, these books follow Nancy Drew, who's a teenage detective. She is in her small town, and I cannot remember for the life of me what that small town is called. Maybe I can find it real quick. I kind of doubt it. Anyway, she lives in a small town, and there's always things happening, you know, like something going missing, or there's like in this one, there's supposedly a ghost in this old house. And I guess I can kind of spoil this. I mean, skip like the next minute if you really don't want to know. But if I remember right, it's a guy that's like crept up in this house that was like, who was supposed to inherit the house and didn't, and has been using this secret staircase, this hidden staircase, to move furniture around to creep out the old ladies that live there so he'd get the house. It's got huge Scooby-Doo vibes, and I love Scooby-Doo, and I mean, if you love Scooby-Doo, you'll love this, because there's also the group of teenage friends, which again, I really like in books. I love it in the Raven Cycle series. I loved it in American Royals. I loved it in the Perfect Chemistry trilogy. The Shadowhunters books have really great friendships. But you have her two best friends, Beth and George. George is a girl, so you have some really cool, very alternative women represented in the book. And, you know, her boyfriend, I think his name was Ned. It was either Ned or Ted. I can't remember for the life of me. And at times, Beth and George's, or was it Beth and George? Oh, it's been too long. Their boyfriends show up, and they're all just really, really fun people. They're really great characters to read about. And I reread the 5th book in the series by Carolyn Keene, which is a pen name. There's been multiple Carolyn Keenes. But the first, I think it was 12 or 15, maybe 5. I don't know. I feel like it was like 15 books were written by the same woman under the pen name Carolyn Keene, and over the years, the pen name was picked up by other people, because I believe the first 5 at least came out in the, I think it was 7. I don't remember. I just love these books. Came out in the 30s. Because my mom, she's a huge fan of these. She loves these books just as much as I did. I learned my love of these from her. And she has reprint anniversary editions of the first books. These were updated, I feel like, in the 50s or 60s. So everything in the books is very vintage now, but they were updated from the 20s or 30s, whenever they were originally written. They're just a lot of fun, great friendships, very suspenseful, especially to kids. Mystery. They're not gory, they're not horrifying, they're just spooky and right up a kid's alley, and frankly still very entertaining as an adult. I read the 5th one, The Secret of Shadow Ranch, I think it was like a year and a half ago now, and you know, even though I knew what happened, I still really liked it. They're just good reads. They're short, they're fun, and especially when a kid reads it for the first time. I have, of the original 7, I know, I have a very specific memory attached to when I read each of those, and every time I see them on the shelf, it just brings back that memory, and it's a good way to walk down memory lane. And I'm sorry if you hear the door squeak, my cat is going in and out. So moving on to my 3rd book, I feel like nobody has ever mentioned this. I've never met anybody else that's read this book other than my mother, who recommended this to me. But it is Harriet the Spy by Louise Fitzhugh, and this is a tattered copy, so you'll have to excuse it. But this story basically follows a little girl. I believe she's in like 4th grade. She comes from a fairly well-to-do family, but she's kind of lonely. She doesn't have any friends, so she sits at her window or on the playground and looks out at the people around her, and she writes stories about them. I remember there's one scene, I think it's at the beginning of the book, where she's sitting by the roots of an oak tree, and she's imagining a little town in the roots of the oak tree and making up whole lives for these little imaginary people that live there. She ends up getting into trouble when she loses her notebook where she writes all of these stories. And it ends up a whole big issue, because some of the stories that she's written about people aren't always very nice. Not that she's trying to be mean in particular in most cases, but she's just writing what she thinks these people are doing and thinking. It's very entertaining. It's, you know, it's a good example of a kid writing for fun. And this book, I remember, inspired me to do some of the same. I don't think I have any of the notebooks that I wrote my little spy stories in, but yeah. I remember, and at one point in the book, she even goes into somebody else's house and goes looking for something. I really don't remember, but it's funny, it's suspenseful, it's very low stakes. It's great for a kid, and it's still a good laugh as an adult. I loved that book. So my 4th book, I feel like everybody's read these. Maybe not this one. This was my absolute favorite in the series, but it is the Magic Treehouse series by Mary Pope Osborne. This one in particular was my favorite out of all of them. It was Christmas in Camelot. And if you don't know, the Magic Treehouse series was following a brother and a sister who found a magic treehouse in the woods, where they could go anywhere in time, or really anywhere in the world. Like they could go to the safari or Antarctica or whatever, based on the books that were there. So they could open a book and go to wherever that book took them. I knew there was Civil War on Sunday. That was another of my favorites. And they usually took place at a certain, it was Civil War on Sunday, Christmas in Camelot. Very entertaining books, very historically accurate. I remember there was one time in the 2nd grade when I was reading these. I can't remember what that book was called for the life of me. But they're in Paris, and they meet Alexander Graham Bell, who invented the telephone. And, the teacher asked, we were going through questions on like a practice quiz out loud, and it was who invented something. Who invented the light bulb? It was Thomas Edison. And one of the false answers was Alexander Graham Bell, and she wanted to know if anybody knew what he did. And because of these books, I did. And they really helped to inspire a love of history and a love of nature and wildlife, because both of those things are places and times though that the kids go to. And again, you have a really great brother-sister relationship that really rarely do you see in books. I find that you see more often in kids literature, but especially not in YA and on into adults. But it's a very sweet relationship. They make friends, and there's great representation of the era and what was going on at that time in all of the books. Much of the information historically is correct. It's very accurate. She manages to work her story in around the actual framework of the event, or the place, or like there's one, something with lions or tigers. I feel so bad. I don't have them. I don't remember. I kept this one because it was my absolute favorite. There with wildcats, and she really is going through and teaching children about like the savannah and how these animals live together, and it was just really fascinating. I remember reading it, but I don't remember much about it. This one I've read over and over again, so I do remember a lot about it. But I really recommend these books to kids just because not only are they addictive to kids, they're not very long, especially even for kid standards, 107 pages. But they help to inspire a love of reading and a love of history. So, people I've heard are either math and science people or they're English and history people, and these definitely encourage you and try to get you on the English and history side, the team, because if it weren't for these, I might not be so hardcore on the English and history team. So, moving on to my last book, it is again a series, and I have the whole series here because they are very slim books, but the American Girl books. I have the whole box set for Felicity, and I think you might be able to see on the shelf behind me. Yeah, I have the box set for Kaya, and then I had a bunch of the odd and end books that came with the dolls, because I loved them. They were my best friend for a while, and I had quite a few of them. I was so lucky. I loved them so much, and I have hung on to them because I am sentimental and cannot let them go. But the books, again, with getting kids involved with history, it's just wonderful because the characters, they're obviously very much meant for little girls, but I think boys could find enjoyment in them because of the trouble they get into. It's entertaining. I think boys could enjoy them if they could get over it's about a girl factor. So Felicity's books, anyway, were my favorite. They followed her at 10 years old in colonial Williamsburg. Her father was a patriot and was part of the, rebellion from England. And her best friend, Elizabeth Cole, came from a loyalist family who was very staunchly loyalist. Felicity's family is also a working class family who, her father owns a general store in town. Her grandfather is very critical of her father, and he's a loyalist, very, very old world, very old fashioned. And she also has multiple siblings. So there is a great family dynamic in these books. And there's also the experience of loss and grief when she loses one of her family members. And there's also great representation and great examples for kids when there is new family members, new babies brought into the family. One of her younger sisters is born during the series, and it's under less than ideal circumstances. She has the animal best friend that she rescues and takes care of and is very devoted to. So I think these books teach kids a lot about different aspects of life, and I think that is very valuable. So at least in the Felicity series, it is Meet Felicity. That was the one. I have a couple copies of it because it came with the doll. The Meet book always did come with them. Book 2 is Felicity Learns a Lesson. Book 3 was Felicity's Surprise. Book 4 was Happy Birthday Felicity. Book 5 was Felicity Saves the Day, and book 6 was Changes for Felicity. And again, it's these little girls who, they might be back in time, but the books are written in such a fascinating way. I actually don't see who wrote these particular books, because I know depending on the girl, they switched off in authors. I have to look that up. I'll put the author down in the description down below, because it's got to be listed somewhere on here, I think. But it gets girls immersed in history. It gives them kind of somebody to look to for examples on maybe how to handle things. And again, it gets them reading, and the books are actually, let me see if I can get one out. They're beautifully illustrated inside. They're not in just solid text. I mean, just beautiful. They have little margin illustrations. Some pages are solid text. But there's Felicity with like the bad guy in the story. Just gorgeous. Very, very well written. And you always have like a family tree in the front. I just loved them. And frankly, to this day, still love them. Each of the girls, there's a box set for each of the main characters. I believe, I mean, I know when I was a kid there was anyway. I think they've changed a lot of the characters that they offer now. So that might be a little different. And on top of that, there's also, I don't see, oh, don't mind me. Each of the characters also had mysteries that went along with them. And again, I loved Kaya just as much as I love Felicity. So I had hers, and they're actually pretty good little mysteries. You know, usually they follow the plot of, oh, something went missing, I have to find it. But actually in some of the stories, there's pretty high stakes, people losing their lives, very serious things addressed. So they're very much worth the read, and very, very healthy, I think, for kids to come across. You know, I am not qualified in any way to speak on like child development, like small child development. I am dual majoring in English education. So take my word with a grain of salt, but I know what I learned from these books and what I experienced while reading them, and I'm just telling you based on how I thought and felt as a kid. So that pretty much wraps up my video. This was a totally spur of the moment video that I have a feeling a lot of people are going to hate or just not watch, and that's fine. But I just had so many memories like resurfaced sitting outside today, and it was so much fun. And again, these books are near and dear to me. They're the ones that have survived the purges of donating to the library, because they just meant that much to me. And they're books that I will hang on to as long as I can, because they're just that good. And believe me, especially when I was a kid, I devoured books. There are others that meant a lot to me, like I read the Diary of a Wimpy Kid books and loved them. Percy Jackson, of course, but those were a little bit later. These were the books I read first, second, third grade or thereabouts. So yeah, you know, this might not be a reading list for somebody else that's 20 years old, but you know, if it is, go for it. But they're just books that I have great memories of, and I'd love to talk about my memories, and I just wanted to share. So I hope you guys did enjoy the video, despite it being kind of a weird content wise. So we'll have a more normal video come Monday. You guys will like that, I promise. So hope you have a great day. See ya.